The frost clung to the steel like a shroud, biting into the gloved hands of the crew as the T-72 rumbled across the East German plain. It was October 1983, and Major Anatoly Kuznetsov gripped the commander's periscope, his breath fogging the glass. The tank's 125mm smoothbore gun swung lazily, its autoloader humming beneath the turret. A marvel of Soviet engineering, they said. Composite armor layered with reactive slabs, designed to shrug off anything the NATO dogs could throw. Kuznetsov had trained on these beasts for years. The T-72 was no mere machine. It was the Red Army's iron fist, invincible in the Fulda-Gap simulations. "We are the hammer," his instructors drilled into them, "and the West's toys will shatter against us." But deep in the Urals testing grounds, where the snow muffled the echoes of gunfire, the generals had gathered in a bunker that reeked of diesel and stale tobacco. General Viktor Petrovich Volkov, grizzled veteran of Afghanistan's dust-choked valleys, paced the concrete floor. The air hummed with the low throb of ventilation fans, pulling in the chill from outside. Charts of armor penetration curves lined the walls, scribbled with equations that promised supremacy. The T-72's hull could withstand 800 millimeters of rolled homogeneous steel equivalent at 2,000 meters, reactive tiles that exploded outward to disrupt shaped charges. A fire control system synced to laser rangefinders, spitting sabot rounds at 1,700 meters per second. "Our tanks are fortresses on tracks," Volkov boasted to his aides that morning, his voice gravelly over black tea. "The Americans' M1 Abrams? A gas-guzzling relic blind to our massed assaults. Their Chobham armor is clever, but ours is brute force perfected. Quantity has a quality all its own." They believed it, down to the rivets. The Soviet doctrine was unyielding. Overwhelm with waves of steel, 40,000 tanks rolling from the Warsaw Pact lines like an avalanche. Intelligence from the GRU painted the Abrams as vulnerable. Its turbine engine guzzled fuel. Its optics lagged in low light. Reports from defectors whispered of teething problems in the Abrams' early batches, high-drop pneumatic suspension failing in mud. Volkov's staff pored over grainy satellite photos from NORAD overflights, mocking the angular American hulls. "They build for show," one colonel sneered, tapping a penetration table. "Our 3BM-42 Mango rounds will gut them at parity range. KE penetrators with tungsten cores, 550mm RHA at 2 kilometers. The NATO lines crumble in hours." The bunker lights flickered as a teletype clattered in from the border exercises. Volkov snatched the sheet, his eyes narrowing. It was a routine live fire drill, T-72s versus mock-ups of Western heavies. But the numbers didn't add up. One tank, a fresh-off-the-line model from the Chelyabinsk factory, had its turret lifted. Not pierced, not dented, eviscerated from within. The report was terse. Catastrophic kill. Ammunition cook-off. Crew status, unknown. Volkov crumpled the paper, his face hardening. "Sabotage," he muttered. "American spies in the works." His aides nodded, but doubt wormed in. This wasn't the first whisper. Months earlier, in a classified exercise near Kaliningrad, another T-72 had suffered the same fate. Turret popped like a champagne cork, flames licking the ejected hatch 20 meters away. They dismissed it as bad luck, a faulty propellant charge in the carousel autoloader. The T-72's design was elegant in its ruthlessness. 22 ready rounds stacked vertically under the turret floor, each a 125mm behemoth loaded in 7 seconds flat. No human loader to slow the rhythm in the heat of battle. But the physics should have held. The hull's glacis plate sloped at 68 degrees, deflecting kinetic energy like a shield wall. Explosive reactive armor, ERA blocks, each 5 kilos of hexagen-laced rubber, detonated on impact to shear warheads. Volkov ordered a full diagnostic. X-rays on the breached tank showed no external breach, no telltale melt from shaped charges. The destruction bloomed from inside, as if the ammo had turned traitor. Panic simmered beneath the bravado. In the Kremlin's war rooms, far from the biting winds, Politburo aides pored over KGB intercepts. Silver Bullet, the Americans called it in hushed memos, a code name slipping through the cipher cracks. Volkov's counterpart in Moscow, Marshal Nikolai Ogarkov, slammed his fist on the oak table during a midnight briefing. The room smelled of sweat and fear, maps of Europe pinned with red arrows pointing west. "It's a myth," Ogarkov growled, but his eyes betrayed the lie. Reports from East German spies described U.S. Army trials at Aberdeen Proving Ground. A new kinetic penetrator, longer than anything in the Soviet arsenal, fired from the Abrams 120mm Rheinmetall gun. Depleted uranium core, they guessed. Radioactive dart-slicing air at Mach 5. But how? The T-72's spaced armor with air gaps and ceramic inserts was meant to erode such threats. Penetration models predicted survival at 1,500 meters. Yet the ghosts multiplied. In a fog-shrouded maneuver on the Czechoslovak border, a platoon of T-80s, upgraded siblings to the 72, faced holographic Abrams projections. One round, unseen, phantom-like, struck home. The simulator's readout screamed, turret separation, spallation showering the crew compartment. Volkov watched the replay on a flickering CRT screen, the green phosphor glow casting shadows on his furrowed brow. "This isn't war," he whispered to no one. "It's sorcery." The contrast gnawed at him. Soviet tanks built for the apocalypse, reduced to fireballs by a single invisible sting. Their vaunted quantity versus the West's precision, a blunt hammer meeting a scalpel forged in secret. The generals convened in secrecy, the bunker's air thick with cigarette haze. Theories flew like shrapnel. Was it a new propellant, making rounds burrow deeper? Electromagnetic tricks from DARPA, softening the ERA? Volkov traced the scar on his cheek from a 72 ambush, remembering the reliability of Soviet steel. But now, doubt poisoned the faith. If the silver bullet was real, the Fulda Gap wasn't a breakthrough. It was a slaughterhouse. As the teletype spat another alert, this one from a defector's whisper of M829 rounds in U.S. stockpiles, Volkov felt the chill seep deeper than the frost outside. The Red Army's backbone was cracking, not from overwhelming force, but from a bullet that turned fortresses into tombs. And the Americans? They were just getting started. The bunker door hissed shut behind Colonel Elena Petrova, sealing out the Siberian gale that howled like a wounded bear across the testing fields. It was late November 1983, and the air inside carried the metallic tang of overheated electronics, mingled with the acrid bite of chain-smoked Belomorcanals. General Volkov stood at the head of a scarred oak table, his uniform rumpled from sleepless nights, fingers drumming on a stack of classified dossiers stamped with the red hammer and sickle. Around him, a dozen officers, engineers from Nizhny Tagil, intelligence liaisons from the GRU, shifted uneasily in folding chairs, their faces illuminated by the harsh glare of overhead fluorescence. The room vibrated faintly with the distant rumble of idling T-72s, their diesel engines warming for another round of futile tests. "We dissect this now," Volkov barked, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "No more ghosts in the machine." He slammed down a grainy photograph, a T-72 fresh from the assembly line, its turret wrenched skyward in a twisted arc of metal, flames frozen in mid-roar. The crew compartment gaped like a fresh wound, ammo racks fused into slag. No external scars, no crater from a shaped charge, no gouge from a sabot round, just internal Armageddon. Petrova, the lead ballistics expert, leaned forward, her glasses fogging slightly from the steam of her tea. She'd seen hull breaches before, heat rounds melting through like hot knives. But this was violation from within, as if the tank had imploded under its own weight. The anomaly had struck during Operation Zarya 83, a classified maneuver in the pine-shadowed valleys of East Prussia. A platoon of T-72 M1s upgraded with Contact 1 ERA tiles, each block a 4.5-kilo mosaic of RDX explosives sandwiched in fiberglass, advanced on a mock NATO defensive line. The ERA was their pride. Upon impact, it detonated in microseconds, hurling fragments at 2,000 MES to disrupt incoming warheads, adding 300 mm equivalent protection against chemical energy threats. The tanks rolled in echelon formation, 125 mm guns traversing with the precision of a metronome, laser rangefinders painting targets at 4 kilometers. Captain Sergei Ivanov commanded the lead vehicle, his headset crackling with orders. "Forward, comrades. Show the imperialists our resolve." Then, the glitch. A single report echoed across the valley, not the thunderous bark of Soviet guns, but a sharper crack, like bone snapping. Ivanov's tank shuddered. Alarms wailed in the turret, overpressure, fire in the carousel. The autoloader, that Soviet ingenuity stacking 22 rounds in a 7.62 Mainers ring beneath the floor, jammed mid-cycle. Petrova replayed the telemetry in her mind. The propellant bags, nitrocellulose-based with 900 kJ muzzle energy, should have burned clean. But something ignited them all at once. A chain reaction blooming at 3,000 degrees Celsius, gases expanding 1,000 times their volume in a heartbeat. The turret ring, a 1.2-meter diameter weld of 50 mm steel, sheared like paper. The 20-ton carousel rocketed upward, propelled by 5,000 psi of pressure, trailing shreds of depleted uranium penetrators and high-explosive squash heads. Ivanov's voice cut through the static in the after-action logs, frantic and disbelieving. "Contact! No, it's inside! Evacuate!" Then static. The crew never made it out. Petrova's team arrived hours later, the wreck steaming in the frost, the smell of cordite and charred flesh hanging heavy. Autopsies revealed spall. Fragments from the inner walls vaporized into plasma, shredding lungs and arteries. But no entry wound. The round, if it was a round, had ghosted through the 500 mm composite glasses. Sandwich of steel, fiberglass, and corundum ceramics sloped at 68 degrees. Without a ripple. Panic rippled through the ranks like a shockwave. In the bunker, Volkov's face reddened as aides stammered explanations. "Faulty primer," one suggested, a young major from the design bureau. The 3V48 propellant destabilized in the cold, coefficients of expansion mismatched by 0.02%. Petrova shook her head, her voice steady but edged with frost. "We tested at 40 Celsius. No anomalies." Another theory. Sabotage. KGB whispers pointed to a Latvian machinist with Western ties, slipping micro-fractures into the turret rings during forging at 1,200 degrees. Volkov latched onto it, ordering purges. 3 arrests by dawn, confessions extracted under the glare of Lubyanka lamps. But deep down, the denial cracked. This wasn't human error. It was the West's black magic, a silver bullet that bypassed the laws of ballistics. They humanized the horror in whispers. Ivanov wasn't a fool. He'd aced gunnery quals, his tank's fire control system integrating the TPD-K1 sights with ballistic computers accurate to 0.5 mils. The T-72 was no fragile toy. Its low-profile 2.19 mm silhouette made it a hard target, hull churning 40 km/h over rough terrain on Christie suspension. Urate tiles pre-detonated on impact, creating a counter-jet of plasma at 8 km/s. Yet one invisible sting, and the fortress became a pyre. Contrast burned. Soviet waves, 55 tons of armored inevitability, versus America's precision poison. A dart that slipped the net. The generals escalated. Volkov wired Moscow, urgent request for Politburo review. Marshal Ogarkov responded with a ciphered teletype, his words clipped. Contain, investigate, no leaks to NATO. But leaks seeped anyway. Defectors in Vienna babbling of U.S. trials. A round called APF-SDST, fin-stabilized discarding sabot with a tail bleed for reduced signature. Petrova pored over smuggled specs, length 750, velocity 1,670 mph from a 120 mm bore. Depleted uranium penetrators, self-sharpening on impact, eroding armor like acid. But how did it reach the ammo? The physics taunted them. At 2 km, drop negligible, spin stabilized to 30,000 RPM. Yet the T-72's spaced array, air gaps disrupting long rod kinetics, should have blunted it to fragments. Denial fueled frenzy. Emergency drills in the Urals. T-72s fitted with experimental liners. 10mm tantalum sheets to catch spall. Mock rounds fired from captured Abrams guns. Grainy footage from Afghan captures. Results? Inconclusive. One tank survived a glancing hit, ERA blooming in a fireworks of shards. Another popped. Turret airborne, crew vaporized. Volkov watched from a foxhole, the blast wave flattening snow in a 50-meter radius. "It's not the armor," he growled to Petrova as they trudged back, boots crunching ice. "It's the soul of the beast. They've weaponized the void." The horror deepened in the nights. Officers dreamed of ghosts in the gun sights, American phantoms firing from nowhere. Soviet competence, once unassailable, now mocked. Their autoloader, faster than any Western breach, became the grave. 7 seconds to load, an eternity when betrayal lurked inside. The contrast clawed, brute Soviet might, layered and reactive, versus the silver bullet's elegance, a needle threading the eye of a storm, turning iron hearts to ash. As December loomed, Volkov stared at the latest report, the bunkers hum a dirge. The silver bullet wasn't myth, it was evolution's cruel joke, and the Red Army bled first. The Kremlin's inner sanctum pulsed with the weight of empire, its marbled halls echoing under the boots of hurried aides on December 12, 1983. Marshal Nikolai Ogarkov stormed into the Situations Room, a cavern of polished walnut and brass lamps that cast long shadows over the circular table. The air was thick with the scent of polished leather and simmering samovar tea, undercut by the faint ozone hum of secure telephones linking to distant outposts. Ogarkov, his frame gaunt from chain-smoking and command, tossed a leather-bound dossier onto the felt surface. It landed with a thud, pages spilling like fallen leaves, KGB intercepts, ballistic charts, witness sketches from the East Prussian debacle. Around the table sat the inner circle, Politburo hardliners, GRU chiefs, and a cadre of physicists from the Kurchatov Institute, their white coats rumpled from frantic all-nighters. "This silver bullet mocks us," Ogarkov rasped, his voice a gravel mill grinding against the room's tension. He jabbed a finger at a schematic of the T-72's autoloader, the carousel, a deadly merry-go-round of 22 shells, each 125mm round, a 25-kilo serpent coiled in readiness. "Our tanks bleed from no wound. Explain it, or heads roll to the Volga." The officers leaned in, the fluorescents buzzing like angry hornets. First up was Dr. Ivan Sokolov, head of reactive armor R&D at the Votkinsk plant, his hands trembling slightly as he unrolled a blueprint. ERA was their salvation, he insisted. Contact 1 tiles engineered with a dual-layer explosive fill, RDX at 1.6 GC CM3 density, detonating at 8,700 MRES to create a counter-spall cloud. The anomaly? Internal resonance, Sokolov theorized, sketching waves on a notepad. American rounds vibrate at harmonic frequencies, say 2.5 kHz from fin flutter, exciting the turret ring's welds. Microfractures propagate, igniting propellants via adiabatic heating. We reinforce with niobium alloys, 0.1% admixture, and it stops. Nods rippled around the table, a fragile raft in denial's sea. Sokolov detailed the math. The T-72's hull, 80mm steel over 440mm composite equivalent, sloped to yield effective thickness of 100 mm against KE threats. But if the penetrator's tail shed mass asymmetrically, discarding sabot pedals timed to induce torque at 30,000 RPM, the energy couples inward, bypassing ERA's outward blast. "It's not penetration," he said, voice gaining fervor. "It's subversion. Our tests at Kubinka showed 15% failure rate in simulated vibes. Add dampers, rubber isolators at 5mm thickness, and the carousel stays sealed." Ogarkov grunted approval, but doubt flickered in his eyes like a faulty bulb. The theory fit the forensics. No entry hole, just overpressure scars from gases at 4,000 bar. turret blown 15 meters with kinetic energy rivaling a Katyusha rocket. Next, Colonel Dmitry Kuzmin from KGB Directorate S, his face a mask of Baltic ice, slid forward grainy photos from a Vienna safehouse drop. Sabotage, Comrade Marshal. Infiltrators. He outlined the network, a ring of Estonian turncoats in the Chelyabinsk foundries, bribed with Swiss watches and promises of defection. They'd laced the 3BM-42 Mango rounds tungsten carbide jackets with micro-voids, tiny bubbles, 10 microns across, induced during sintering at 1/450th. Under impact stress, Kuzmin explained, voids coalesce into cracks, propagating at 5 kilometers. The American round strikes and our own ammo fractures sympathetically. Spall from within, chain reacting the nitroguanidine propellant. The room murmured. It humanized the betrayal. Kuzmin painted the scene. Midnight shifts in the Urals. Sparks from arc welders hiding whispers of CIA handlers. Interrogations yielded confessions. 3 engineers broken in Lubyanka cells, their screams echoing off tile walls. We purge the chain, he vowed. New vetting, polygraph synced to GSR sensors, loyalty oaths under Andropov's gaze. But the theory unraveled under scrutiny. Sokolov countered with data. Void analysis on wreckage showed uniform density, no anomalies beyond battle stress. If sabotage, why only T-72s? T-80s with their Contact 3 upgrades, 200mm extra versus CE, suffered identical pops in Kaliningrad drills. Tension coiled tighter, the samovar whistling like a kettle on the boil. Enter Major Lena Voronova, signals intelligence from the 16th Directorate, her folder bulging with decrypted chatter from Fort Meade. Electronic warfare, she proposed, voice cutting like a bayonet. DARPA's got jammers pulsing at 1018 GHz, softening our ERA electronics. The tiles detonators, cadmium sulfide sensors, glitch failing to fire. The round slips through intact, its uranium core yawing at 0.2 degrees to thread the air gaps in our spaced armor. 50mm voids designed to destabilize long rods at 1.5 kilometers. She dove deep. The T-72's fire control, with its KTD-2 laser at 905 nm wavelength, could be spoofed by infrared decoys, blinding the rangefinder while the penetrator homed. Our doctrine assumes mass, Voronova said, contrasting sharply. Waves of 10,000 tanks mutually supporting. But if each Abrams fires this ghost dart, unjammable at Mach 5, our quantity becomes pyres. Ogarkov slammed the table, tea sloshing. Proof? Voronova hesitated, then revealed a smuggled audio. U.S. drill chatter. Silver bullet away, negative signature. The room fell silent, the weight of failure pressing like the Siberian frost outside. Theories piled like snowdrifts, each rational scaffold buckling. One physicist from Arzimas 16 posited quantum trickery, exotic materials phasing through armor via phonon manipulation, but laughed it off as vodka-fueled fancy. Another blamed Cold War metallurgy. American alloys with rhenium additives, 0.3% by weight, sharpening penetrators to molecular edges. Meetings stretched into dawn, aides collapsing over charts of penetration hydrodynamics. Bernoulli's principle twisted, pressure waves at 10 GPa shredding corundum inserts from inside out. KGB reports swelled. False leads to Polish smugglers peddling dude rounds, Italian defectors spinning tales of Vatican spies in the supply chain. Purges followed. 5 colonels demoted, factories audited under floodlights, workers shivering in 30°C inspections. Yet the horror lingered, unquenched. In hushed corridors, officers whispered of curses, Stalin's ghost punishing complacency. The contrast clawed deeper. Soviet ingenuity, autoloaders cycling at 8 rounds per minute, ERA blooming like defiant flowers, reduced to tinder by a bullet that danced the physics. Ogarkov dismissed the session at 4 a.m., the room reeking of exhaustion and fear. Dig harder, he ordered, or the West carves our heart. Volkov, back in the Urals bunker, received the Kremlin's edict by ciphered burst transmission, the decoder whirring like a trapped insect. More theories, more dead ends. The silver bullet evaded them still, a specter in the snow, promising not just kills, but the unraveling of an empire's steel spine. The fluorescent hum of the Skunk Works hangar in Palmdale, California, cut through the pre-dawn chill like a scalpel's edge. It was January 1979, and the air inside Lockheed's Black Site facility carried the sharp bite of machining oil and fresh machined titanium, undercut by the faint crackle of arc welders sealing prototype hulls. Dr. Evelyn Hargrove, lead materials scientist from the Army Research Laboratory, wiped sweat from her brow under the glare of welding masks, her clipboard clutched like a shield. Around her, a team of engineers, DARPA contractors in grease-stained lab coats, Watervliet Arsenal ballisticians with slide rules at the ready, huddled over a gleaming 120mm barrel mock-up, its bore rifled in a subtle twist to impart spin without destabilizing the dart. This wasn't Soviet brute force. It was precision's quiet revolution, born in secrecy after the Yom Kippur War's wake-up call, when Arab T-72s with Sagar missiles had bloodied Israeli centurions. Hargrove's voice cut the din, steady and unyielding. The T-72 isn't a tank. It's a puzzle box of composites and gaps. We don't smash it. We thread it. The contrast burned in her mind. Red Army fortresses, layered with 80mm steel over corundum ceramics and fiberglass, sloped to deflect the world's fury. But the Abrams Rheinmetall gun demanded more, a kinetic energy penetrator that laughed at ERA's fireworks. Project Silver Bullet, codenamed under the broader XM-1 armor program, traced its roots to 1976, when Congress greenlit $4.5 billion for a tank to counter Warsaw Pact hordes. Early prototypes faltered. The XM-803's 105mm gun, tested at Aberdeen in '77, bounced off simulated T-64 glacis at 2 kilometers, its M735 round, early DU with aluminum sabots, yawing at 1.5 degrees under spin decay, velocity dropping to 1/400 mph. Failures piled. One test round shattered on launch, shrapnel peppering the range crew. Another ricocheted, embedding in a concrete berm 300 meters off target. They iterated in the shadows. By mid-1978, the team shifted to depleted uranium, U-238 alloyed with 0.75% titanium for ductility, density 18.9 GCCM3, twice steel's heft in a slimmer rod. Hargrove sketched the physics on a greaseboard, kinetic energy as 1 Tomb V2, where mass trumped velocity. The M829's penetrator core stretched 22 inches long, a needle of DU encased in a depleted uranium jacket to prevent mushrooming on impact, self-sharpening as the material sheared, adiabatic heating forging a plasma jet at 6,000 K. Imagine a river through rock, she told the assemblers, her breath fogging the chill metal. Not erosion, displacement. The rod's length to diameter ratio, 31, lets it punch 800 mm RHA equivalent without destabilizing. Sabot petals, lightweight aluminum lithium alloy, discarded at muzzle exit with pyrotechnic charges timed to 0.1 milliseconds, shedding mass symmetrically to keep the dart arrow straight at Mach 5. The development saga unfolded in fits. First firings at Yuma Proving Ground in October '78, under floodlights that turned the desert to silver. The gun, a licensed Rheinmetall L44, 5.3-meter barrel with 48 calibers length, thrummed as the round chambered, its brass case etched with M829A1 markings years premature. Velocity clocked 1,670 mph, but early prototypes fragmented on ERA sims, Soviet-style RDX blocks exploding outward at 2 km/s, fragment clouds eroding the tip by 40%. Hargrove's fix. A windshield fairing of tungsten carbide 5mm thick, ablating on contact to blunt the counterjet. Tests ramped. 50 rounds into T-72 mock-ups shipped covertly from Iraqi scrapyards, hulls dissected post-impact. One hit at 2,500 meters. The rod pierced the 500 mm composite glacis. Slope normalized to 1/200 mi effective without yaw. Inside, the magic, spallation. The DU's momentum, 20 mJ of energy, vaporized inner layers into a 10,000 ms spray, ricocheting off the turret basket's bulkhead. But the turret pop? That was the revelation's heart. The T-72's Achilles, its autoloader carousel, a 2.2-meter ring of 22 rounds stacked vertically, just 450 meters below the floor, vulnerable to underbelly spall. Hargrove replayed telemetry from a 79 static test. The penetrator, after breaching, tumbled slightly. Intentional yaw from asymmetric mass distribution, showering fragments into the ammo bay. Propellants ignited not from direct hit, but sympathetic detonation. Nitrocellulose bags, desensitized for storage yet volatile at 1D200 bar overpressure, chain reacting at 3,500 ms flame front. Gases ballooned 1/200 times volume, pressure spiking to 6,000 psi. The turret ring, a 1.1 met weld of 45 mm steel, failed at the seam. Blowout panels non-existent in Soviet design. The 18-ton turret rocketed 25 meters skyward, kinetic energy hurling it like a missile, crew compartment a furnace of 2,000 degrees C plasma. Engineers humanized the Triumph in late-night debriefs, the hangar reeking of gunpowder residue. Lead designer, Colonel Marcus Hale from Rock Island Arsenal, paced the concrete floor, his voice gravelly from Arizona dust. We didn't build a bullet. We built a surgeon's tool. Failures tempered them. A 80 prototype at Fort Knox overheated the barrel, DU residue pyrophoric, igniting a test stand, 2 techs scorched, delays mounting to $200 million overruns. Refinements followed. The MA-29A1 iteration, greenlit in '82, added a tail bleed vent, carbon fiber fins stabilizing spin to 28,000 RPM, reducing radar cross-section by 70% for stealthy launches. Analogies simplified the arcane. Like a spear through chainmail, the rod exploited gaps. Soviet air voids meant to trip kinetics, instead channeled the yaw, turning defense to doom. By 1983, production scaled at Lake City Army Ammunition Plant, Missouri, lines churning 5,000 rounds monthly, each inspected under electron microscopes for DU homogeneity, voids under 2 microns. Field trials at NTC Mojave. Abrams platoons versus live T-72s captured in Lebanon. Turrets popping in sequence. First hit at 3 kilometers, chain cooks vaporizing 3 crews in 12 seconds. No survivors. The contrast etched deep. Soviet quantity, 40,000 tanks massed for the breach, versus this Silver Sting. 1 shot per kill, KD ratios hitting 20.1 in sims. Hargrove watched a replay on a bulky VCR, the screen flickering green. The round's trace invisible, a ghost in the optics, until the bloom of fire. Whispers reached the east, defectors carrying scraps of schematics, but too late. Silver bullet wasn't sorcery, it was physics unchained. DU's density weaving through ERA's chaos like water through cracks. In Palmdale's sterile labs, as the Cold War's frost deepened, the West forged not just ammo, but the obituary for an empire's iron heart. Volkov's ghosts had names now. M829, the penetrator that turned hammers to dust. The Fulda Gap stretched like a scar across the Hessian hills, a corridor of fog-draped forests and rain-slicked roads where the Iron Curtain's frayed edge met NATO's steel resolve. It was the imagined dawn of World War III, simulated in the fevered war games of 1984, but the ghosts of real trials haunted the exercise fields from Grafenwöhr to the Bavarian pines. Major Anatoly Kuznetsov, survivor of that East Prussian anomaly, now commanded a T-72 platoon in the mock assault, his tank's tracks gouging mud under a leaden sky that dripped sleet like accusatory tears. The air reeked of wet earth and idling diesels, the V-46 engine's growl. A defiant rumble against the whine of American turbine howls in the distance. Kuznetsov peered through the TKN-3 periscope, its night vision phosphor blooming green ghosts of Abrams silhouettes, 3 kilometers out. "They are blind to us," he radioed his gunner, voice steady with drilled faith. The T-72's low hull, 19 meters to the turret roof, slunk through the underbrush like a predator, composite armor shrugging simulated fire, Contact 1 ERA tiles unscarred, the autoloader primed with 22 Mango rounds eager to pierce. but the silver bullet waited, invisible in the gray. Across the line, Captain Elena Ramirez gripped the Abrams controls, her gloved hands slick on the yoke, the Honeywell AGT 1500 turbine spooling to 1,000 shaft horsepower in a high-pitched keen that cut the damp air like judgment. The M1's Chobam armor, Chobamite layers of depleted uranium mesh and porcelain tiles, 1/200 mm equivalent against KE, hunkered low, its thermal sights painting the Soviet advance in crimson blooms. No waves of steel today. Doctrine had evolved. 1 Abrams per sector, firing from hull-down defilade. The 120 mm L-44 barrel elevating with hydraulic precision. Ramirez's loader chambered the M829. The Sabot's aluminum petals gleamed under the cab's red light. The DU penetrator, a matte black arrow, 610 mm long, weighing 10 kilars of concentrated doom. Target tank bearing 045, the gunner intoned, the laser rangefinder pulsing at 1,062 nm, unseen, unjammable. The round lanced out at 1,670 ms, a whisper against the thunder of full broadsides, its tail fins slicing air with 28,000 RPM spin, trajectory flat as a ruler to 4 kilometers. Kuznetsov's world ended in a blink. The round struck the glacis at 68 degrees, physics bending to the West's will. The DU core, denser than lead sole, displaced rather than shattered. Hydrodynamic penetration, the rod's length eroding the composite sandwich, 80 mm RHA over 105 mm ceramic, air gaps collapsing like failed promises. No ERA bloom. The tile detonated microseconds late, its RDX charge at 8,700 mass glancing off the fairing's tungsten carbide nose, fragments scattering harmlessly at 1,500 mass. Inside, the penetrator yawed, deliberate, a 0.3-degree tumble from asymmetric DU layering, showering the belly with spall. Fragments vaporized corundum at 5,000 K, peppered the carousel floor, 450 and below the turret ring. Propellant bags ignited. Nitrocellulose grains 900 kJ each, flashing at 3,500 ms in a sympathetic chain. Gases swelled 1/200-fold, pressure rocketing to 7,000 psi. The 1.1 met ring weld, forged at 1/200 excise in Chelyabinsk's fires, sheared at the seam. The turret lifted, 18 tons airborne on a pillar of plasma, arcing 30 meters before crashing into the mud with a seismic thud that shook the earth. Kuznetsov's radio crackled with screams from the platoon, 4 T-72s in echelon, now pyres. Contact! Turnal, evac. Static swallowed them. His own gunner slumped, shrapnel from the overpressure wave lacerating his throat. The loader, trapped in the carousel pit, burned alive as the ammo cooked off in sequence. First the KE sabots, tungsten cores melting at 3,400 and then heat rounds squirting copper jets inward, vaporizing flesh and steel alike. Kuznetsov clawed for the hatch, lungs seared by 2,000 gases, but the blowout was total. No escape in Soviet design's ruthless efficiency. The tank became a tomb, crew KIA in 4 seconds, kill radius claiming the flanking vehicle in secondary blasts. Ratio, 4.0, Abrams unscathed, turbine idling cool at 38 liters per kilometer versus the T-72's 500-liter guzzle. The massacre replayed in Volkov's final briefing, January 1985. Back in the Urals bunker, now choked with the dust of dismantled illusions. The room's ventilation fans wheezed, pulling in the bite of pine sap from outside. But the air inside soured with defeat. Stale reports and the metallic tang of unspent rage. Volkov, aged a decade in months, hunched over a map of the gap, red arrows reversed, now pointing east in retreat. Ogarkov had wired from Moscow. Reevaluate doctrine. Quantity yields to quality. But Volkov knew the truth, etched in the forensics of 200 test wrecks, 100% catastrophic kills from single hits, 0 Abrams losses in parity sims. The Silver Bullets ledger was merciless, KD 100.0 in scaled exercises at the NTC, where captured T-72s met live fire. 1 round per tank, no reload needed. Soviet autoloaders, once a speed edge at 8 RPM, now accelerators to oblivion. Geopolitics shifted in the shadows. Warsaw Pact stockpiles audited. 12,000 T-72s retrofitted with hasty turret bars, steel grills over the ring, adding 2 tons, but saving nothing against yawing spall. Production lines at Uralvagonzavod idled. Workers idled in breadlines, the economy groaning under $2 billion in rushed countermeasures. The contrast sealed the verdict. Soviet hammers forged in 5-year plans and Gulag sweat. 40,000 units by 85. Each a symphony of reactive slabs and slope deflection, crumbled before the bistoury of free market ingenuity. DARPA's labs, fueled by Silicon Valley venture and congressional pork, birthed the M829 not in isolation, but ecosystem. Integrated with GPS precursors for first-round hits, thermal optics piercing fog at 10 kilometers, turbine mobility outflanking massed waves. The pop wasn't mechanical failure. It was systemic rot. Soviet central planning choked innovation, bureaucrats in the Gosplan stifling R&D, physicists like Sokolov buried in theory while Hargrove's teams iterated 50 prototypes yearly. Ideology blinded them. Marxist dialectics preaching inevitable victory, ignoring the West's chaos-born creativity. Private firms like Teledyne iterating DU alloys in taxpayer-funded sprints. Volkov crushed his cigarette under boot, the ember dying like a star. Outside, snow buried the proving grounds, muffling the echoes of popped turrets. The Red Army's spine wasn't broken by bullets alone, but by the mirror it refused. A command economy versus adaptive capitalism, brute force versus surgical strike. The silver bullet etched the Cold War's epitaph, not in Berlin's fall, but in the Gap's silence, where ghosts of crews whispered of hubris's price. The Empire's iron heart, once unyielding, now rusted from within, awaiting the thaw that would wash it away.